The year 1922 did not just uncover a tomb. It opened a compressed moment of history, a sealed ledger detailing the transition of a god king. When Howard Carter and his team finally breached the intact burial chamber of Tutankhamun, the world gasped at the gold, the masks, the shrines, the endless treasures. Yet for an archaeologist, the true revelation often lies in the mundane. Beyond the glittering sarcophagi, stacked high in the antechamber and annex, were hundreds of amphorae, baskets, and wooden chests, all crammed with the most immediate human necessity: food. This wasn't a humble packed lunch. It was a menu for eternity. A provision list comprising everything from joints of roast beef and whole poultry to jars of unguents, honey, and several dozen sealed vessels of wine. It was a staggering, almost gluttonous display. The question isn't simply what they buried with the pharaoh, but why they buried so much and at such expense. These foodstuffs were not random donations. They were ritual objects. Each morsel represented a calculated resource investment. Who mandated this feast? Who paid for it? And what silent message did this inventory send to the gods, to the people, and to the rivals of the new pharaoh? Today, we are not looking at the gold of Tutankhamun. We are analyzing this historical menu as an autopsy of power. The provisions discovered in KV 62, Tutankhamun's tomb, were not simply sustenance. They were an economic and political testament carved from the resources of the entire New Kingdom. To truly appreciate this inventory, which included 48 boxes of poultry and meat cuts, over 30 large jars of wine, and countless baskets of bread and fruit, we must conduct a social autopsy of the dinner table. This meal, intended for a singular individual in the afterlife, was built on the backs of thousands of living subjects. First, consider the wine. The amphorae were meticulously sealed and catalogued. Analysis of the jar seals, as detailed in papers by Dr. Leonard H. Lesko, cite Lesko, King Tut's wine cellar, reveals not only the vintage year, ranging over 2 decades, but also the vineyard of origin and, critically, the name of the chief vintner. This level of bureaucratic oversight shows that the production of the pharaoh's burial wine was a state-controlled operation managed by an elite class of specialist artisans. The best produce was segregated, designated, and prepared for the gods and the pharaoh alone, establishing a clear line of social stratification where resource access was entirely governed by religious and royal privilege. But the complexity extends far deeper than the vintage. The bulk goods, the bread and the meat, speak directly to the corvée labor system and the vast resource mobilization capabilities of the 18th dynasty. A single bovine carcass prepared for a funerary meal represents not just the cow itself, but the pasture it required, the herdsmen who tended it, the specialized priests who ritually slaughtered it, and the scribes who recorded the transaction for the temple or palace bureaucracy. The sheer volume of emmer wheat required for the thousands of loaves found suggests a diversion of agricultural produce away from the common populace. In a society where the annual flooding of the Nile dictated the precarious margin between survival and famine, the commitment of these precious calories to a dead ruler was the ultimate declaration of the pharaoh's divine right to control all earthly resources. The provisions reinforced the theological concept of the pharaoh as the intermediary between the human and the divine. As Egyptologist Salima Ikram notes, cite, Ikram, Death and Burial in Ancient Egypt, the food's purpose was to sustain the Ka, the spiritual double of the deceased, allowing him to endlessly repeat the funerary rites necessary for eternal life. The meal was a guaranteed, perpetual supply chain, ensuring Tutankhamun's continued power and influence even after death. This was a powerful, visible message to the elite who attended the funeral. The pharaoh's status remains absolute. The food was therefore a tool of political control, assuring the royal court that their own high-status provisions in the afterlife were secured only by their continued service to the throne, living or dead. The dinner service itself, bronze plates, decorated bowls, was designed to be used by the pharaoh's ka, never to be touched by the mortal living again, reinforcing the barrier between the earthly and the sacred. Every jar, every loaf was an immutable component of the Egyptian state religion, a non-negotiable insurance policy for the continuation of their entire cosmic order. Having decoded the profound social statement behind the provisions, our next challenge is to step into the kitchen of the funerary cult and attempt a recreation. The goal is not just to cook ancient food, but to understand the practical labor and expense that justified its spiritual significance. We're focusing on one of the most fundamental yet complex items found in abundance, the bread made from emmer wheat. Emmer, Triticum dicoccum, is an ancient grain, tougher to process than modern bread wheat. The logistical challenges begin immediately at the source. Modern flour mills do not process emmer efficiently. It retains its tough outer husk, the gloom, after threshing. This means we must source whole grain emmer and then utilize traditional grinding methods, not with an electric mixer, but with a simple rotary quern, or, if we're truly accurate to the New Kingdom period, a saddle quern. The repetitive, back-breaking motion of grinding enough grain for even a dozen loaves, as documented in archaeological records detailing ancient Egyptian domestic life, speaks to the intense physical difficulty of the ancient method. Dr. R.T.J. Kappers, cite, Kappers, the archaeobotany of the Near East, has shown that the constant use of sandstone querns introduced a high level of grit into the final flour, a factor that contributed significantly to the severe dental wear observed in mummies, including Tutankhamun himself. The challenge here is to emulate that process. I'm spending several hours grinding the grain by hand, feeling the rough, coarse texture of the flour and the immense fatigue in my arms. This is not casual baking, it is intensive labor. This is the cost, translated from time and effort. A gift of this bread to the pharaoh represented days of physical toil from the lower classes, consecrated by the religious elite. The mixing is another matter. Unlike modern yeast, the ancient Egyptians used a sourdough leaven, often cultivated from fermented beer residue. The tomb contained sealed jars of what appeared to be ancient grain-derived leavens, a testament to their mastery of fermentation. Our recreation utilizes a wild yeast starter, captured from the atmosphere, much like the Egyptians would have utilized their own environmental microbiota. The dough, made with the coarse emmer flour and perhaps a touch of honey, also found in the tomb, is dense, sticky, and slow to rise. The final critical step is the baking. Ancient Egyptian ovens were often simple clay domes or large open fires. The loaves found in the tomb were typically conical or round, baked rapidly at high heat. We use a replica dome oven,
monitoring the heat by eye and instinct, just as the master bakers of Thebes would have. The resulting bread is dark, dense, and slightly gritty, with a complex, sour tang. The process demanded specialized knowledge and an intimate understanding of grain, weather, and fire, skills that elevated the bakery workers from common laborers to essential, revered participants in the funerary process. This exploration phase has been a humbling physical experience. It makes the resource management necessary for those hundreds of loaves in the tomb feel immediate and real. This wasn't merely a shopping trip, it was a complex logistical undertaking that tied agriculture, labor, specialized religious knowledge, and bureaucratic oversight into one dense, sour loaf. It is a powerful reminder that every piece of food found in the tomb had a human story of toil and dedication woven into its very fiber.
The final moments of this investigation are dedicated to the simple act of tasting this coarse, dense bread. The sourness, the grittiness, the intense flavor of the ancient grain. This is not the refined, airy bread of a modern table. It is food that speaks of survival, of ritual, and of absolute hierarchy. The physical exertion of the recreation segment, the grinding, the patient fermentation, links directly back to the social analysis of Section 2. The difficult reality of producing just one loaf highlights the scale of the collective effort required for Tutankhamun's hundreds of provisions. This bread, heavy and labor-intensive, was the opposite of a casual gift. It was a tangible, material offering that certified the pharaoh's ability to command and harness the productivity of the entire two lands, even for the purposes of his own eternal life. The food was not simply placed there for his ka to eat. It was a political statement to any rival or skeptic that the young king's transition was supported by the enormous resources of the Egyptian state. It was an edible insurance policy against political instability and religious doubt. The ultimate revelation, hidden within the tomb's VIP menu, is that the funerary provisions were an act of calculated performance. The ritual food served as the highest form of resource dedication, showcasing the crown's divine authority. By meticulously providing every comfort, every necessary calorie, the living established their continued allegiance and solidified the theological mandate of the pharaoh's power. It was the ultimate demonstration of resource management as a tool of political and religious dominance. The quiet taste of this ancient bread allows us to touch the hands of the workers, the priests, and the vintners who contributed to the pharaoh's journey. We don't just cook ancient food, we decode the civilizations behind them.
I rule just the same.